All right, we are back. It's another week, another good vibe show. I'm Martin Falls. Joining me now is Debbie Cox DeNova. She always has great topics. You need to listen to this one because this has happened to everybody at one time or another. I got a couple of friends that started dating in eighth grade and they still married. So maybe they're out the picture. All right. But moving on from past relationships.
Yes.
I can't wait to hear this one.
Yeah. So, and many of us already know this, that you can even actually be in a marriage and still there are parts of yourself that think back on past relationships that are unresolved within yourself. So it's important to note that whenever we get into a relationship with someone, there are two components of it. There is the relationship that we have with the other person, but then there's also the relationship that we have with a version of ourselves that emerges as a result of the relationship. So this is often based on stories that we tell ourselves about what it means that we're with the other person. And really, whenever you're in connection with another person, what you're doing is you're developing a shared context of the world. So you're actually able to see yourself through their eyes. This is what's so mesmerizing and wonderful about that first love experience is that if someone has this halo effect around you, you can actually get behind their eyes and see yourself through that halo effect. It feels really good and vice versa, right? So we already know that the cycle of a relationship goes connection, and we talked about rupture and then repair and then reconnection, right? There is a step between rupture and repair, though, that hardly ever gets talked about. And by the way, this information comes from Heidi Priebe. And that step between the rupture and the repair is a remorse and reevaluation. And so it's really important what happens in that stage right there to how you end up processing, because what happens when you don't have a sort of like a resolved relationship, maybe it goes into rupture, right? And then it ends. There's no repair. And so if you're left stranded in that place of remorse and reevaluation, it can be very difficult because what naturally comes up as a result of the rupture in a relationship, and that's when you have a misalignment of context. So we're walking, harmoniously looking at the world through the same eyes, looking at each other through that shared vision, and then suddenly something happens, big or small, and there's a misalignment, and now we're not exactly on the same page. And then the work of it is to realign and open up the space of our relationship even more so that we can make space for our different perspectives, okay, ideally. And that part happens in the reevaluation remorse place. Now, in reevaluation and remorse, what naturally happens is that we have an experience of shame. So we fall out of alignment with the other person. There's an experience of shame. And in a securely attached relationship, right, where you're vulnerable and open and it's authentic, you will use that shame to sort of evaluate your behavior, how you might have shown up in an unloving way, how the other person might have shown up in an unloving way, and then hopefully course correct so that you can come back into repair and then reconnection. In an insecurely attached relationship, however, this is where we talked about insecure attachment support. We usually have two people who are not actually in relationship in a very clean, authentic way. And that's because, for example, the avoidant may have some difficulties being vulnerable and open, right? Where the anxious might have difficulties being independent and they want to be closely attached. And so what happens is they hardly ever get to that clean space that happens in a secure relationship where they see each other authentically, they know each other's strengths and vulnerabilities, they know where the boundaries are. In either case, when you have a breakup, it's difficult, right? But for a securely attached person, it's easier because there's an intense pain, but what you're missing is an authentic expression of what you really shared together, okay? So you miss calling them every day and telling them about your day. You miss the dates that you used to go on to the movies. The problem with insecurely attached relationships is this, that when you don't have an authentic connection, when there is sort of this missing gap of actual authentic connection, what we do as human beings is that we tell ourselves stories so that we can self-regulate and make ourselves feel better. So where we don't know and understand, we sort of create a story. Well, maybe this person is thinking this, and so maybe that means this about myself, right? And we bring ourselves to a space of okayness through our stories. So we never get to that clean space of authentic understanding of the person. And an insecurely attached relationship, when you feel that shame after the rupture, you're more likely as an insecure to try to skip past the shame experience and go right to, listen, I'm sorry, just, without evaluating anything, I'm sorry, just please forgive me, or actually getting off putting that shame to the other person, getting angry and wanting them to accept the story that you're telling about the relationship. The reason it's harder for an insecure person to get over a relationship is because you can create countless stories about the person after you break up. And oftentimes the story that you create after you break up isn't a bitter one. He or she is a narcissist. That actually I can do way better than them. They were probably seeing someone behind my back anyway. And anyway, just on it. And so depending on the day, it can be a story that's like, oh, I should have done some better. Maybe I should beg this person back. Or it can be like, you know what? I'm going to go off and I'm going to find somebody so much better than this person. Like, what was I even thinking in the first place?
Just real quick, it really makes you feel good about your life. Because when you see everything happening, you go, my God, I thought I had bad relationships, but they make it really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And, so here's the thing is that if you want to be someone who actually cleanly moves on from a relationship, and I've talked to a lot of people who are like, why can't I get this person out of my system, right? This shared bond that happens. It's important to remember that if you are broken up with someone and you are still entertaining stories about the relationship, and again, that you're talking, well, maybe this is what happened, or maybe I should have done this, and you're doing that instead of actually going into what you actually felt about the relationship, that is going to prevent you from healing. The stories are going to distract you from the emotional wound, because really that's what it is. What we're talking about is an emotional wound that could be festering under the surface. And look, there's value to analyzing what happened in the relationship. Absolutely. But first, you got to tend to the wound, because the wound is not going to go away no matter how much you analyze it, right? So that you are preventing yourself from the healing process if you're spinning a lot of different stories years and years and years later. And so the thing to do is to go into emotional first aid first. So what concretely actually happened in the relationship? Without the labels, he's a narcissist, without the, oh, she was so toxic. What concretely happened? If we had a video camera, what happened in the relationship? Well, he said this to me, or I found out this, whatever the rupture was, actually admit that to yourself first, and then sit with the inner child that absorbed the blows of that emotionally. Like, what did that feel like? So oftentimes it's very difficult to sit with, like, it just hurt. That hurt my feelings. Like, I felt abandoned. I felt rejected. And so being able to sit with that hurt part of ourselves and actually just help comfort that inner child part of ourselves through the process. Then once you get to the other side of that, then understanding what lessons come out of that. And that even if that person died or doesn't want to talk to you anymore, or is married to someone else, that you can actually understand that the version of you that existed, that kind of developed out of having a relationship with that person, will always be with you. So even if someone passes away, you will still contend with the relationship you have with the person that developed out of there, and you can actually create resolution with that person without ever having to talk to the actual person.
People realize sometimes the best answer is we weren't yoked together, and we were not meant for each other, so hey, we gave it a good shot.
Yeah, and you know what? That's the one thing is that people don't understand, is that if you're going through that rupture repair process back to connection, you can actually do rupture and repair and connection with somebody that you've decided that isn't the person, right? And people do that all the time. So it's like we kind of come to a place where the next step of it is like you're doing that emotional first aid, you're letting yourself feel the feelings, you're learning the lessons, and then you share that truth, that concrete truth, with the other person. When this happened, I felt this. So what happens usually when someone breaks up is that they're both trying to share the story that they're telling about what happened. Like, oh, you're toxic, and trying to get the other person to agree to the story that they're telling about what happened instead of sharing just truths. When you go from a secure place and a conscious place of saying, when this happened, I felt this, and asking the other person to mirror back to you what they felt, you will get all the information that you need. It murders all of the what ifs. in your mind. So the stories get to die. You get to have an honest, concrete communication. Maybe there's a chance of you repairing and moving into a new relationship with a different foundation. Or maybe the two of you go, you know what? The connection, the reconnection that we're going to, the shared context now that we're going to come to is that this is not really a relationship that's going to work for either one of us moving
Yeah,
forward.
you might say, I didn't like you anyway, and they might say, I didn't like you anyway.
Right, exactly. And that actually constitutes a new kind of connection. It really does. But when you are left in that sort of like unresolved, like no closure kind of place, it literally means that you've gone into that sort of the rupture and you're in that remorse reevaluation phase where shame is up and that person just leaves and you're just left kind of wallowing in there and you're not satisfied with the view of who you are that is in behind their eyes as they walk away. There's a craving to sort of
But
correct
if
that.
you give it time, they will answer your questions for you.
Oh yeah.
A lot of times you'll see what happened with other things and you go, okay,
Yeah.
that turned out okay.
Yeah, and you know what? But the easiest and fastest way to do that is just to have a conscious conversation, if you can. It's not always safe to. It's not even sometimes a good idea to. But if you can have a conscious conversation where you actually ask questions that resolve it. Otherwise, you keep telling stories, right? You
Right.
could tell a story. Oh, well, that person was this anyway, and it might not be a true story. And there endless number of stories that can keep coming in, and that's the problem. And here's the other thing: you have to be willing to actually release this person. Sometimes people are so like they would rather entertain the stories, even if they're negative, just to keep the connection. And there's a part of them that's sort of psychologically, protecting that part by not wanting to let go of the stories for that reason.
And that's a good way to look at it. So that's great advice.
Yeah.
All right. What are we talking about next week? Part 2?
Don't know yet.
All right. Debbie, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. All right, we're going to take a break here, and don't forget, each and every week we have a new Good Vibes, and Debbie brings up a new topic and answers a lot of questions. So share it on Facebook and let the world know. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. Don't go away.